We tend to trust the technology in our schools. We see it as a neutral tool for learning, right? But what if the code that's running our classrooms has its own hidden curriculum? Today, we're going to dig into how the algorithms shaping education might not be nearly as objective as we all think. Okay, let me ask you something. When you type something into a search engine, do you just assume the results you get are an impartial reflection of reality? I think for most of us the answer is yes. But what if they're not? So check this out. Try searching for successful tech founder. You'll probably get a pretty predictable, kind of homogeneous set of results. But then just change one word. Search for female tech founder, and the results look totally different. And look, this is no accident. It's a crystal clear example of how search engines can reflect and even amplify our societal biases. And this isn't some new, shocking thing. The scholar Sophia Umojinoble did absolutely groundbreaking research on this, showing how searches for terms like black girls, for example, often return some really harmful and stereotypical results. What her work really hammered home was that search engines aren't just neutral libraries of information, they're actively shaping how we see the world.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to bust the myth of neutral tech. Then, we'll nail down exactly what algorithmic bias is. After that, we'll see how it shows up in the classroom, unpack the tough spot this puts educators in, and finally, explore how we can all become digital detectives.
Okay, let's dive right into our first big idea, the myth of neutral tech. This is all about shattering the idea that technology is somehow above it all, above human prejudice.
This quote from Sophia Umojinoble just nails it. She argues these biases aren't bugs, they're features. Algorithms are built by people with specific goals, often commercial ones, in mind. In other words, they're not these objective, impartial things. They are absolutely shaped by the values, the blind spots, and the biases of the people who create them.
All right, so that begs the question, what is algorithmic bias, really? Let's break it down.
At its core, it's when a computer system takes our own human prejudices, the ones that already exist in society, and then magnifies them. And what happens is this can lead to some seriously unfair outcomes, especially for marginalized groups.
So where does all this bias even come from? Well, it can start with the data itself. If you feed a system biased data, you're going to get biased results. But it's also about the choices people make when they design the system, the lack of diversity on the teams building these tools, and of course, the commercial interests that often put profit way ahead of fairness.
And this is where it gets really serious. Now we're talking about bias in the classroom, because now we're talking about more than just search results. We're talking about systems that can literally shape a student's entire future.
And look, this isn't some abstract what-if scenario. Research from folks like Baker and Hawn shows that this has real, tangible, and often harmful consequences for students, affecting everything from their grades to the opportunities they get.
I mean, just think about this for a second. Imagine a risk prediction tool that's more likely to flag students from certain backgrounds as at risk, or an automated grading system that consistently gives lower scores to students who are non-native English speakers, or even adaptive learning software that ends up widening achievement gaps by pushing some students toward easier material. In every single one of these cases, an algorithm is quietly shaping a student's path.
So all of this creates a huge problem, a real catch-22 for teachers. Which brings us to the educator's paradox. It's this fundamental conflict of critiquing the very tools that you've come to depend on.
In this quote right here just perfectly sums up the bind that educators are in. Their job is to teach students to see and question these algorithms of oppression, but what do you do when the oppressor is baked right into the software you have to use every single day?
So it puts this massive question on the table. With schools relying so heavily on these commercial, black box technologies, how can a teacher possibly encourage students to expose the bias in a tool without getting in trouble or undermining the entire system they're a part of? It is a really tricky balancing act.
But it's not all doom and gloom. There is a way forward. And in our last section, we're going to talk about how we can start forging a new generation of digital detectives.
The whole idea here is to shift students from just being, passive users of technology to being active, critical investigators. This is what we mean by critical digital literacy. It's not enough to know how to use the app. It's about knowing how to question it, how to take it apart, and how to see the systems of power working behind it. Okay, so how do you actually do this in a classroom? Here's one really cool idea, the bias audit. You have students run their own comparative searches, just like the one we talked about. They document what they find, they analyze why the results might look that way, and they can even propose better, more ethical ways to search. They basically become the researchers.
Or how about this one, debiasing a data set? Get students to look at a real-world problem, like an AI that screens resumes. They can dig into how using a company's past hiring data could teach the AI to discriminate against certain people. And then they can brainstorm actual solutions, like how you might rebalance that data to get a fairer outcome.
And you can wrap all of this up into what's called a transparency protocol. First, students learn to find the story in the data, what it's showing you, but also what it might be hiding. Second, they dissect a platform's design to figure out its real economic goals. And finally, they get to create their own fairness statement, basically an ethical rulebook for a brand new AI tool. You see, at the end of the day, we're not just using technology anymore. We're living inside of it. And the systems we use every single day are constantly collecting data and telling a story about who we are. By becoming digital detectives, we can learn to read that story, to question it, and maybe, just maybe, even start to rewrite it. So I'll leave you with this to think about. In this world that's so deeply shaped by algorithms, what story does your data tell about you?